Welcome to the second part of the crash course on the cell. This video is intended for Secondary 1 and Secondary 2 students. In the first part of the cell crash course, we talked about the characteristics of living things and gave examples of living and non-living things. And in the second part, we're going to be talking about the different components that make up plant and animal cells and the differences between them. In the first part of the crash course, we said that all living things are made of cells. And we also talked about the fact that cells interact with their environments, exchange material with their environments, they adapt, they grow, and they also respond to stimuli. And so another cool thing about cells also that we talked about is that they're microscopic, right? We can't see them with the naked eye. But they're so small and they're so cool, but they also are very, very, very complex. And they're actually made up of different parts called organelles or cell constituents. So if you look here at my two diagrams, they're cut open so that you can see that even within a very tiny cell, they're made up of different parts which make them complex. And so we're going to be talking about the roles of those organelles in today's video. First, let's take a look at animal cells. Now, animal cells, as the name suggests, comprises all of the organisms that belong in the animal kingdom. So, for example, elephants, any insect or earthworm or crab, and even human beings. So we're also composed of trillions of animal cells. So here we have the diagram that we're going to be using throughout this video of our animal cell. And then we also have a picture of what an animal cell would look like under a microscope. Now you're probably thinking, why is it purple? Well, the dye is added to the cells so that we can see them better. So as you can see, we have our cells, we kind of get an idea of what they look like in real life, and we see that there is probably an organelle in there in that dark space. So we're going to be talking about what those are and what they do. Just remember that all of our body is comprised of different types of cells. We talked about that in the first video. So our brain cells are different than our heart cells, which are different than our skin cells. But for the purpose of today, we're going to keep it super simple and we're just going to talk about the general animal cell. So let's start with the nucleus. So if I'm looking at my animal cell diagram here and I want to label it, the nucleus is right here. So I'll label it with a 1. So what does the nucleus do? Well, the nucleus is actually really cool. It is the control center of the cell. It is responsible for telling the cell organelles within the cell what their job is, what they need to do. And it also plays a really valuable role in cell division. I also tell my students that the nucleus is the brain of the cell, right? It's the one that knows what's going on. If I were to cut open the nucleus, though, and I were to look inside, I would find chromosomes. And chromosomes are really cool because they're responsible for heredity. It's what it comes from our parents, what's passed down from our parents. And chromosomes are made up of our DNA. And if I were to take little sections of each chromosome, those would be called genes. And that is how we get our hair color and our eye color and how we get our blood type. And certain diseases come from those genes. And so all of these things that have to do with heredity are within the nucleus. Now, since the nucleus controls the functions of the cell and also contains very important genetic information in the form of chromosomes, it needs to be protected. And so we have an organelle that actually does that job, and it is called the nuclear membrane. We also call it the nuclear envelope. And so if I look at my animal cell here, and we want to label where that nuclear membrane is, we're looking at around right there. So it's that purple shell around the nucleus that has those yellow dots on it. And actually, what's really cool about the nuclear membrane is that it is not solid. It has little pores that act as doors that allow an exchange of substances within the cell. And so it allows items or substances to come into the nucleus and then leave through the cytoplasm. And so we'll be talking about that organelle later. So that is basically what the function is of the nuclear membrane. The nucleus and all the other cell organelles are suspended in what we call the cytoplasm. And the cytoplasm, if I look at my animal diagram here, my animal cell, is right here. And so the cytoplasm is really cool because it has a kind of more like a jello consistency. It's not solid, but it's not liquid. And what's really cool about the cytoplasm is that it's responsible for the circulation of wastes and nutrients throughout the cell. So sometimes nutrients and waste that enter and exit the cell need to be organized and stored somewhere. And so this is the job of the vacuoles within an animal cell. And so their job primarily is to store waste or store nutrients for another time. And if I look at my animal diagram here, the vacuoles are actually the blue guys. And so as you can see, there are several throughout an animal cell for storage of waste, of nutrients, anything that wants to exit or enter the cell. So the nutrients that are obtained by the cell are held in the mitochondria. And the mitochondria is actually kind of the power source of the cell. And if I look at my cell diagram again, the mitochondria is right here. And the mitochondria, there are several throughout the cell, and their job is to create energy through cell respiration. So they take glucose and they take oxygen, and then they will turn that into carbon dioxide and waste. So what they are doing is using those nutrients to power the cell. Let's see how we're doing so far. Do cells exchange substances with their environment? Is it A, yes, all substances come in and out of the cell freely? B, yes, some substances are allowed to enter the cell, others to exit? C, no, cells are self-sufficient and nothing goes in or out? D, no, only living things exchange substances with their environment. The answer is B. Some substances are allowed to enter the cell, others to exit. Let's take a look at the last important organelle to understand this answer. So let's take a look at what's holding the whole cell together. It's called the cell membrane. And the cell membrane is like the skin of the cell. It protects it. And so if I look at my animal diagram here, my animal cell, I have number 6. It's our last blank. And so the animal cell has a cell membrane. And like the nuclear membrane that we talked about earlier, it is semi-permeable. And what does that mean? It means it has those pores. It's not solid, and those pores allow substances to enter and exit the cell based on what the cell needs. So the cell membrane is responsible for diffusion. So it allows waste to exit and substances to enter the cell. And then it also has osmosis. It's responsible for osmosis, which we know is the exchange of water in and outside of the cell. So as you can see, our animal cell is complete, but we still have a couple of organelles that we didn't label. And that's okay, because in your secondary 1 and 2 world, you don't need to know about those ones, the orange part around the nucleus and those dots. You'll learn about those later. So all you have to worry about, all you have to remember are the 6 organelles that we talked about. So now let's take a look at plant cells. So plant cells, you guessed it, belong to all the organisms that belong to the plant kingdom. So we're talking trees, grass, flowers, all of those organisms are comprised of plant cells. And so here are a couple of examples. So this is our diagram that we're going to be using to kind of explain what a plant cell looks like. And then we also have a cross-section of an onion, and you can see how the onion is actually organized, and it's a little bit different than an animal cell. So obviously the cells are a lot more rigid, a lot more angular, and then you can see the little nucleus dots, and it's a lot more organized. So obviously, again, it's not purple. The dye is used so that we can see it better under a microscope. So remember that all plants, not all plants are the same. So we are just going to use for this video today our general diagram so that it'll help us label all those organelles in a plant cell. So first, as we see, we have a lot of similarities between the animal and the plant cell. To start with, both have a nucleus. So if we look at our diagram of a plant cell, the nucleus is right here. And remember, the nucleus is the brain of the cell. It tells the organelles what to do. It's the control center. And then we also have, the plant cell also has the nuclear membrane, that semi-permeable protection around the nucleus that allows substances in and out. Then we also have, in the plant cell, the same thing as the animal cell. We have the cytoplasm. And so when we talk about the cytoplasm, we're talking about all of those organelles being protected in that kind of jello material so that they are protected, they're suspended, they stay where put. And then finally, we also have another similarity, which is the mitochondria. And so the mitochondria is right here. And the mitochondria, remember, is in charge of cell respiration, right? It's the powerhouse of the cell. It takes that sugar and converts it to energy. Now, the vacuole looks a little bit different in a plant cell than in an animal cell. So if I look at my plant diagram again, it is up here. It's this big blue organelle there in the plant cell. It is actually called the central vacuole because there's only one, and it takes up a lot of a plant cell's volume. It still accomplishes the same job, right? It's a storage for nutrients and waste within the cell, but it also stores water, and it helps keep the plant nice and plump, but also for growth. And so really when a plant is, healthy and, its vacuoles are full, it's going to stand up very vertically. It's very much alive. And then if you have a plant that has a vacuole that is, depleted, it doesn't have as much water in it, it actually kind of starts to wilt over and sag. So vacuoles are a really important part of storage of water in a plant cell. And what's really cool also is that vacuoles in a plant cell, in some plants, actually have a defense mechanism that that kind of dissuades predators from coming at them. So that's a really cool fact about vacuoles in certain plants. Now, there are two major differences between animal and plant cells. The first being the presence of what we call chloroplasts. So if I look at my plant diagram again, my plant cell, chloroplasts are actually these green things down here, and there are many. So chloroplasts are actually really cool because they contain a green pigment called chlorophyll, and chlorophyll is essential to the production of photosynthesis. Now remember, photosynthesis is where plants will take water and carbon dioxide and energy from the sun to produce their own food in the form of glucose and oxygen. So chloroplast is the first major difference, and its job is photosynthesis. The second major difference between animal and plant cells is the presence of what we call a cell wall. So first things first, let's go back. Animal cells and plant cells also have what's called a cell membrane, right? That did not change. That has not changed. Cell membranes are present in both, and they are still semi-permeable, and they allow certain nutrients and substances in and out of the cell. But the presence of that cell wall, which is our last blank here, that cell wall actually gives an extra layer of protection to the plant cell, and it gives it that rigidity, it gives it that form, and like I said, it gives that extra protection. So it makes it that much stronger and tougher. So those are our two main differences, the chloroplasts and the cell wall, which gives us, again, protection and rigidity. Which function is only possible in plant cells? Is it A, cellular respiration, B, exchanges between the nucleus and cytoplasm, C, photosynthesis, or D, storage? The answer is C, photosynthesis. Let's review the organelles in the different cells to understand this answer. So in reviewing all of the organelles that we've explored today, we can notice some similarities and some major differences. So we've put them in a table here for you. So we notice right away that we have the control center in both. We have a nucleus for both cells, animal and plant. And both of those control centers are protected by nuclear membranes. Each of the cells contains a cytoplasm, right? That gelatinous, that kind of jello type substance that holds all the organelles in place. And they each have vacuoles. But remember that animal cells have several vacuoles that have storage, and plant cells have that one central vacuole. Both cells have that mitochondria, that energy source, that place where it creates cell respiration. And then both of them also have that semi-permeable cell membrane. So we just have to remember that when we're dealing with plant cells, they have chloroplasts, which produce chlorophyll, and a cell wall. And those are not present in animal cells because animals do not photosynthesize, nor do we need that cell wall. So that's it. There you have it. All of the organelles and our second part of this cell crash course video. So don't forget to review and practice.